So, this morning, I know this in the program, it had a different title, but this was the title they gave me. So, I like this title, don't you? Marriage, a lifelong union. So this morning, Timmy talked to us a little bit about character development. And do you agree that the best place to develop your character is in the family? You know, this is where we really need to be working with the tools that God gave us. And you know, family and the marriage institution, and those are one of the tools that God gave us to develop character. The more I build and do things, my wife gets on me, because I'm married, about tools. You know, I'm always getting a new tool. Every time we build something, she's like, you have more tools. How many tools do you need? And I said, I need a tool to make my job easier, right? The better the tool, the easier the job. But I've entered another phase of my family life where now not only do I have tools, but now I have grandchildren. And the grandchildren always want to be using the tools. So whenever I'm around working, they always want to work. But I noticed something. So I didn't bring like a fancy tool, but I brought this tool. This is a tool, right? But I notice if I give it to someone who doesn't know how to use it, the grandchildren do this. How much of the floor are they cleaning up if they don't use the tool correctly? Nothing. So the more tools I get, I also have to do what? I have to learn how to use them correctly. And so I think as we talk about marriage, we have to recognize that this is a tool that God gave us, but if it's not used correctly, it can actually cause more damage than good. Do you agree with that? If it's not conducted the way that God says that it should be done, because after all, it's His institution, isn't it? So in the beginning, we have the introduction of the marriage institution. We can find this in Genesis chapter 2, especially verses 18 through 24. Notice what the verse is saying. The Lord God said, "It is not good that the man should be alone. I will make an helpmeet for him." So what's the first thing we recognize here? That being alone isn't the best thing for you. What is the best thing for you? To have a partner, or at least fellowship with brethren and all these things. But just loneliness, out by yourself, how much character is going to be developed if you go live off in the wilderness by yourself? Very little, if any. Yeah. Well, God may find a way to develop the character out in the wilderness, but you understand the point, though, right? So God gave this because it's not good that man should be alone. And it's for this reason, therefore, shall a man leave his father and his mother and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh. So that's important. So we're going to look at some principles this morning. I like the way Timmy brought out 7 principles. I'm sorry, that's not supposed to happen, is it? I don't know why Fentress County is trying to call me. Beware, someone will be calling you in a minute. You're from Fentress, aren't you? You're Morgan. I don't know why Fentress County. Maybe there's a weather alert. Sometimes they do that. So your phone's probably going to go off in a minute. Anyway. So it's important here, though, that a man leave and they become one flesh, correct? We've got that out of there too, right? So you have to leave to cleave. You ever heard that before? You know, these families that start off by bringing all the in-laws with them, that's not the way God intended, correct? There's a certain amount of intimacy that has to occur between these two. These two have to become one, not these 5 become one, or 3 or whatever. You have to leave. In other words, and it's not just physically leaving, you have to grow up and stop being dependent on your parents if you're going to enter into a marriage relationship. You believe that? Does that mean you discard your parents? Of course not. They're still part of the family. But you have to leave to cleave. Notice what it says here in Thoughts from the Mount of Blessing, page 63, 64. It says, "As the Creator joined the hands of the holy pair in wedlock, saying, a man shall leave his father and his mother and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one. He enunciated the law of marriage for all the children of Adam to the close of time. That which the eternal Father himself had pronounced good was the law of highest blessing and development for man." So there's a couple things to pull out of here. First of all, that leave to cleave is a law. That's a law that God made. If you don't do that, then you're not going to be using the tool properly. Correct? And notice what else it says. That this institution of marriage is the law of highest... I'm sorry, I thought I even turned it off. I'm sorry.
Put it on Sabbath mode.
Yeah, airplane mode. Here we come, right? I'm sorry. There's a local emergency, though. Anybody else getting it? You want to pause for a second? Because this is usually tornado warning, so let's make sure we read. I mean, the sky is clear, but that doesn't mean anything, does it? Can you get this? Chippy, can you come and get this? Take that back there. Let her look at it and see what's going on. They usually call me when there's tornado warnings close by. Usually, I'm one of the first people to get called, so you guys, your phones might start blowing up if you have signal. We ready to go back?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so this marriage institution was the law of highest blessing and development for man. So you want to achieve the highest blessings from God and the highest development? What tool might you want to get out of your toolbox? Marriage, right? How many are married in here? Is there any character development going on there? How many of you are single? Are you avoiding some of that character development? Yeah. Okay. Huh? Some tools are expensive. Okay, so first of all, that's another thing she complains about. How much for that tool? Don't you have one of those? No. So, not only leave to cleave, but what is another principle of marriage? And I mean, it wouldn't seem like we really have to talk about this, but we do, don't we? In Genesis chapter 1, 26 and 28, it says, "And God said, let us make man in our image after our own likeness, and let him have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the fowl of the air, over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female he created them." Or male and female created he them. So what we're seeing here, that not only men are in the image of God, but females are created in the image of God. They're another aspect of God. If you really look at it, we need the male and the female together to really represent God properly. Do you see that there? And that's what the family is supposed to do around them, right? Represent God. In verse 28 it says, "And he blessed them, and God said unto them, Be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth and subdue it," etc., etc. So together they're supposed to be fruitful and multiply and subdue the earth. What does that mean, subdue the earth? We're supposed to have the earth in subjection to us. Everything in the earth should kneel to mankind. What it means is that the love that a human family, that Adam and Eve had together, was supposed to subdue the entire earth. The earth was supposed to be subdued by the character of God, represented by these two people that together represent Him. Permeate. I like that. Subdue, permeate with the love that God was expressing there in those two. That's how the earth is going to be subdued. Is the earth going to be subdued by force or legislation or rules or all this? How's the earth going to be subdued? Only by love, right? Only by that. So this was an institution that was supposed to endure and subdue the earth when done the way God intended. You know, I get tools out of the package, and sometimes, you know, men being men, we don't always read all the directions because we know how a tool works. But when we read a roadblock and we say, I don't know what's going on here, I don't know why this doesn't work right, I'll go back and look at the direction and say, oh, I didn't tighten this, or I didn't twist that, or I didn't do that right. Once I do that right, what happens to my tool? It works. So I could tear up some wood with a saw that's not all screwed together, and my depths and all this aren't adjusted right. I can tear up some wood, or I can make some fine furniture. It's how you use the tool, isn't it? So if we use the marriage institution the way God intended, there was to be a great movement across the earth when He made Adam and Eve, wasn't there? It said, God celebrated the first marriage. Thus, the institution has, for its originator, the creator of the universe, marriage is honorable. It was one of the first gifts of God to man, and is one of the two institutions that after the fall, Adam brought with him beyond the gates of paradise. When the divine principles are recognized and obeyed in this relation, marriage is a blessing. So when the divine principles are recognized and obeyed in the relation of the fact that it was one of the best gifts given to man and was to be carried on beyond the garden, then it is a blessing to man. It guards the purity and happiness of the race. It provides for man's social needs, and it elevates the physical, the intellectual, and the moral nature. So it seems to me that that's a pretty good tool to have in the toolbox. But notice what it said. When the divine principles are recognized and obeyed in this relation, marriage is a blessing. See, I'm afraid, or I know, or I can see that around the world today, marriage is not a blessing. In many, many places. In fact, what do we have now? Over 50% divorce rates, broken families. Society is being torn apart at the very bottom because the marriage institution has been so perverted and it's not being used correctly that it's no longer a blessing. In fact, it has a stigma on it that many of the young people today out there in the world, there's a new trend not to get married because it's such a disaster. But was it intended ever to be a disaster? Why did it become a disaster? The only way that my tools become a disaster is if I don't use them right. If I leave them there and never use them at all, they'll be preserved. Or if I use them properly, they build something nice. But when I mistreat them, what happens to my tools? Of course, my wife, or my helpmeet, she says, you left that tool outside. How many tools are we going to leave outside and you're going to go buy another one? I'm like, well, I forgot it and I have to go get another one. Can we stop getting more tools and remember to bring them inside and take care of them? She's right. I don't ever leave my expensive tools out, though. It's always the cheap ones. But it has to be done according to God's plan, doesn't it? It guards the purity and happiness of the race. It provides for man's social needs. And it elevates the physical, intellectual, and moral nature when obeyed in its relation, when its divine principles are recognized and obeyed, correct? So making the right decision. So far we're looking at a few things here. When we're choosing a companion, what should we be looking for? We're going briefly, excuse me. Christ-likeness. Well, the idea is something to complement you, improve you, and make you more whole. Isn't that what God did in the Garden of Eden when He put Adam and Eve together? Why did He put them together? Because it was both of them that represented the character of God. So men need what women have, and women need what men have to complete our fullness. Now, that doesn't mean that it's necessary for everyone, because we'll even read in here, if you choose not to marry, what should you do? It says, or you don't marry for whatever reason, it says, devote yourself to God. You're actually freer to do more work for God. We'll see that in a moment. But when we're choosing a companion, though, we should be looking for a helpmeet. In Genesis chapter 21, 1 through 4, we're all familiar with the story of Abraham. How did Abraham choose a wife for his son? Was Isaac involved in the conversation? Well, not biblically here, but I'm sure they've discussed this before. And Abraham kind of gets an idea of who Isaac is and what would be a good helpmeet for him. So he sends his servant to go find a wife. Where does he go find a wife? One thing that needs to be considered whenever choosing a spouse. He would not go from the people that did not believe like him. Did not go to the unbelievers. He said, you'll go and pick someone from our lineage who understands our principles, right? So it was not from among unbelievers. What's the first consideration that should always be when looking for a helpmeet? The spiritual consideration. Not the financial, not the physical, not the other things. The number one priority is the spiritual consideration. Number two, you see here that parents choosing for their children in the ancient times, and that's so old-fashioned. Isn't it so old-fashioned? That's why we don't do it anymore. But should parents be involved in the selection of a spouse? If we want success, yes. Who knows you better than your parents? Who wants better for you than your parents? Why wouldn't you listen to their advice? But at least have the majority of input from your parents. Now, I know that it might be unusual for them to go find you a wife or a husband that you never met. I understand that. But at least involve them in the process, because they're the ones supposed to be looking out for you anyway, right? You have to trust parental input. Isn't this the way God said it should be done? What happens when we go outside the way He should be done? Is it a blessing anymore? What does it become? It can be a curse, can it? And only one that will complement or complete you. That should be your goal and your desire. Not so selfishly that I got to find somebody who makes me 100%. But your job is going to be what? To make them 100% too. Because the helpmeet goes both ways. So, what about when we go opposite of God's counsel? Look at this paragraph here. What a contrast between the course of Isaac and that pursued by the youth of our time, even among professed Christians. Young people too often feel that the bestowal of their affections is a matter in which self alone should be consulted, a matter that neither God nor their parents should in any wise control. Long before they've reached manhood or womanhood, they think themselves competent to make their own choice without the aid of their parents. How often have you seen this nowadays? This is the norm. The guy, well, I don't need to talk to my parents. Oh, by the way, Mom and Dad, I'm getting married. Well, who's the guy? Well, you'll meet him next week. What?
Has become a curse.
Yes, and that's why marriage has become a curse. And notice what it says. It said here that long before they've reached manhood or womanhood. What age is manhood or womanhood? It depends on the person. I've seen 40-year-old children. They're still living at home. So can we say, oh, you're 18. You should be off doing whatever you want. You know? But all the people in the world, go, go, go. When only your parents are saying, stay, stay, stay. And where do they go? They go. Because why? I'm 18. I'm grown. Who gave you that idea? I bet it wasn't your parents. But have you seen that? I mean, grown children? Yes. And they're not capable of making a decision. They need input. Don't we all need input? It goes on to say here, it says that a few years of married life are usually sufficient to show them their error, but often too late to prevent its baleful results. For the same lack of wisdom and self-control that dictated the hasty choice is permitted to aggregate the evil until the marriage relation becomes a galling yoke. Many have thus wrecked their happiness in this life and their hope of the life to come. So, why was it? Because you didn't seek counsel. It's that simple. So, when the divine principles are recognized and obeyed, let's look at some bad choices. We have biblical examples, don't we? We don't even have to look at modern society, but the Bible shows us that even back then they were making the same mistakes because there's no new thing under the sun. I don't think I'm grown enough to make my own choice, Mom, is something ever said back in ancient times. I think it was. But what about Esau? Do you know that Esau chose a unbelieving spouse without the consultation of his parents? And what was the history of Esau? And I want you to notice what it says here. I want to read these verses. This is Genesis 26:34. 35. It says, and Esau was 40 years old when he took to wife Judith, the daughter of Beri, the Hittite, the Bashemeth, and daughter of Elon the Hittite. So here we have a 40-year-old child right there, don't we? Esau was 40 years old when he took this woman, didn't go ask his parents. Which were a grief of mind to Isaac and Rebekah. What did that do to his parents when he went and did that? You know, children, just like marriage, can be the greatest blessing, and they can be the most painful thing you've ever experienced. And I'm not talking about just for the woman in childbirth. Because why? Because not following God's plan. We've already made a wreck of our family by running off with somebody, and what'd you leave behind? You left parents that are devastated. Did all this all their life to raise you and take care of you, and what respect did you show them now? And how long are they going to carry that hurt? Probably longer than you're alive so far. Do we consider our parents? I mean, there's no young people. I should be talking to young people. I don't know why I'm not talking to
Well,
you.
it affects their happiness too. So when it's selfish when children just go and do what they want to do, because it affects your parents' happiness. So we have.
That's right. It's very selfish and affects their parents' happiness, she said. And what about Genesis here, 27:46? And Rebekah said to Isaac, I am weary of my life because of the daughters of Heth. If Jacob take a wife of the daughters of Heth, such as these, which are the daughters of the land, what good shall my life do me? What was Rebekah saying? If my other kid does this too, I might as well just die. What did I invest all this time and effort and everything in for? Has anyone in here sensed or felt a little bit of Rebekah's frustration? Yeah. Yeah, but do the young people think about their parents when they're doing all these things? Who are they thinking of? Yeah, and the older one. And notice, and Isaac called Jacob and blessed him and charged him and said to him, thou shalt not take a wife of the daughters of Canaan. I'm sure there was more to the conversation than just this sentence talk. After what Esau had done, they were like, no, we need to have a talk. Let's stop to this. What about Samson? We don't need to spend any time on Samson, do we? I do want to spend one little moment on Samson because I can't understand, according to these verses, why when he said, go get this woman for me, they went and got her. They should have packed up and left town. Moved to the other side of the country as far away from her as they could get. So we can see right here a failure of parents, too, to follow the proper plan. Oh, yes, you've picked this person. I'm just happy you love somebody, and I will support whatever you do. Really? Can you really say that? When you're looking at this union going, this is going to be a disaster. So how many marriages or weddings maybe we should not have attended sometime in our life? That we looked at that wedding and said, that's a disaster. I can't go there and say it's against God's plan. How can I put my blessing on that? Can you? I mean, there's kind of been a discussion in my house. Certain weddings I will not be attending. You're my child, but that doesn't mean I have to attend. Because if we're not going to do it God's way, the marriage institution is not a worldly institution. It's a sacred thing. And we have to treat it as such too, don't we? Could anyone here, I hope if you can explain to me why Samson's parents thought this was okay, let me know. Because I don't understand. Always let him have his way and didn't want to put up with, yeah, see? That's right. And how can we forget Lot's wife? We all know this story too, don't we? Because we're determined to have it. Ezekiel 25 tells us he gave them laws and ordinances that were not good for them and that they should not live in, but they wanted them anyway. Remember Lot's wife? Can't forget her. How about this paragraph here? The wife of Lot was a selfish, irreligious woman, and her influence was exerted to separate her husband from Abraham. But for her, Lot would not have remained in Sodom. Deprived of the counsel of the wise, God-fearing patriarch, the influence of his wife and the associations of that wicked city would have led him to apostatize from God. had it not been for the faithful instruction he had early received from Abraham. The marriage of Lot and his choice of Sodom for a home were the first links in a chain of events fraught with evil to the world for many generations. And I can probably truthfully say we're still suffering from them. Yes. So I thought of another couple here. How many are familiar with Ananias and Sapphira? So what kind of wedding, what kind of marriage was this? Did you ever think about it? Did you ever think about their marriage? Oh yeah, they were tight. Yeah? In their own deception and lying, right? Who did they leave out of their marriage? That's right. And was she a good helpmeet to him? Or vice versa? No. Not at all. We're not going to read the verses. We know what happened there, right? Both of them died. But why? You ever wonder why when he went back in and Sapphira died too? In fact, well, let's read the verses. Because it says it right here. But a certain man named Ananias and Sapphira, his wife, sold a possession and kept back part of the price. His wife also being privy to it, and brought a certain part and laid it at the apostles' feet. It doesn't mean that she also knew. It means that she was involved. Because there may be things that your spouse does you don't agree. You're like, before God, I don't agree with that. But the reason she was put to death is because she was part of the problem. Whoops. So let's move on. Help meet. So when we look at Esau and his wife, and we look at Samson, and especially here Ananias and Sapphira, when we're talking about a helpmeet, what are we really talking about? This phrase helpmeet in the King James Version, it's in Genesis 2:18, it says, I will make a helpmeet for him. That comes from Hebrew words, ezer and kenegdo. I don't speak Hebrew. Which mean help and strong respectively. Ezer is related to the word azar, which means to protect, surround, or help. And neged means a front, counterpart, mate, or part opposite. So there's a lot of depth to meaning here. So in this context, meet is an adjective that means suitable. So a suitable help. The phrase helpmeet has often been used to justify the claim that women were created to serve in a subservient position. However, that ezer kenegdo teaches that part of her God-given nature of a woman includes a strength to serve. You notice it says to protect or surround, not just help. So she's supposed to be a helper, a protector, a surrounder. So that implies strength to it too, doesn't it? So the term helpmeet does not imply a woman who's weak or inferior. It emphasizes her strength and importance to her husband and God's purpose. So the title of ezer or helper is one of honor, not inferiority. So when you see helpmeet, that help means protector, surrounder, encircler, and suitable protector, surrounder, encircler that's going to help complement your character. And so it's much bigger than this. And as I mentioned in the beginning, women have a component that men do not have, and vice versa. And this is why together God considers that complete humanity. Think about it as you look at yourself. So the role of a helpmeet is more profound than just someone's there to assist and help, but they should be strong and capable. They should surround and protect their husband, and they should be present to help and do what her husband cannot do without her. That makes her very important now, doesn't it? And something that he should be guarding. She's a co-partner. So was Esau's wife a helpmeet? Was Samson's choice a helpmeet? Was Lot's wife a helpmeet? Was Sapphira a helpmeet? Or any of those? They were actually their downfall. So, again, we can use the tool for good and produce something beautiful, or we can use the tool to destroy things and create something that's fit for the dumpster, right? in construction terms. Right? So helpmeets to each other. 1 Corinthians 7:3. Let the husband render unto the wife due benevolence, and likewise also the wife unto the husband. So who withholds help in the situation? Nobody. Nobody. 1 Corinthians 7:33 and 34. But he that is married careth for the things that are of the world, how he may please his wife. What are married people supposed to be doing? Especially men, what are they supposed to be doing? Seeking how they can please their wives. I miss a lot. I thought that would be pleasing to you, but apparently you don't like the way I did that. But still, I tried. Right? But we need to care for the things of the world. We have to make a living. We have to provide for the home. But we also in there need to be thinking about how to make our wives happy. Correct? And there is a difference also between a wife and a virgin. The unmarried careth for the things of the world, that she may be holy both in body and in spirit. But she that is married careth for the things of the world, how she may please her husband. So we're not supposed to be like doing things to see how we can aggravate our wife or our husband. Let me see if this aggravates her. Now, sometimes my wife thinks I'm doing this purposely, but it's really an accident. I'm not really trying to aggravate her. But I'm trying to learn from what aggravates her. Colossians 3:18 and 19. Wives, submit yourselves unto your own husbands, as it is fit in the Lord. And husbands, love your wives, and be not bitter against them. So here we see the helpmate principle being I don't want to say explained here, but just briefly expressed. So our job is to be looking how to make the other person happy. If we were both doing that, what would be in our house? Happiness times 2. Right? Happiness times 2. Sometimes there's happiness times 1, and that doesn't make it as good, does it? So, did you notice the other principle that I mentioned in the very beginning? The two are to become one. But is that where the sentence ended? It says the two are to become one flesh. Because there's not just two involved in the covenant, is there? There's more than two. There's only two that will be one flesh, but there's still more. But here in Mark chapter 10, but from the beginning of the creation, God made them male and female, and for this cause shall a man leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife, and they twain shall be one flesh, so then they are no more twain, but one flesh. Oh, and what God therefore had joined together, let not man put asunder. You see the third component introduced there? The two become one flesh, but man is there to keep them together. So every marriage engagement should be carefully considered, for marriage is a step taken for life. Both the man and the woman should carefully consider whether they can cleave to each other through the vicissitudes of life, as long as they both shall last. So have you ever taken lemonade? Let's squeeze some lemons. We'll put it in the water, and then we'll add sugar, and we'll stir it up, and we'll make it lemonade. Can you separate those components once you put them together? Can you say, I don't want to be lemonade anymore, or give me my sugar back? Doesn't work, does it? Well, the same thing happens when two come together in a marriage vow, and then they think they're going to dissolve it. They never really get 100% of themselves back. If they separate from that person and go, they're still joined to them somehow, aren't they? God made from man a woman to be a companion and helpmeet for him, to be one with him, to cheer, encourage, and bless him. He, in his turn, to be her strong helper. All who enter into matrimonial relations with a holy purpose, and it's defined. What's the holy purpose? The husband to obtain the pure affections of a woman's heart, the wife to soften and improve the husband's character and give it completeness, fulfill God's purpose for them. So there's that character development. Who's the primary tool in building character in a marriage according to this statement. The wife's the tool, primarily, so that means the man needs to be what? He needs to be something that's willing to be cut and hewn and nailed and pounded and fixed and built into something that he's not. If he's not willing to do that, he shouldn't enter into a marriage relationship, should he? If he's not willing to listen, to be developed by her and all those things, he shouldn't enter into a marriage relation, correct? That's what it says. Because that's the only holy purpose to go into one. So, I know it's like a baptismal candidate up here, isn't it? But I know that this is coming on you soon, son. Be able to be molded and chiseled and hammered and beat up a little bit so that you can grow up and become what you're supposed to be, right? He's the only one I know here is on the chopping block. In the youthful mind, marriage is closed with romance, and it's difficult to divest it of this feature with which imagination covers it. The young are just they're so enshrouded with this fantasy, and to impress the mind with a sense of the weighty responsibilities involved in the marriage vow. This vow links the destinies of two individuals with bonds which naught but the hand of death should sever. But they're not thinking that in the beginning, are they? Boy, that's why they really need their parents' input, don't they? So let's look at the principles we've already gone over. Principle review. The choice, your choice, should be a helpmeet. Now that you know what helpmeet means. Number 2, therefore it's necessary to have input from those who know you best and want to guide your future. Number 3, you have to leave to cleave. The two need to become one. They need to share what? Everything. You know, I listen and work because I need spending relationships. Well, at work, like some of these women, I need to work because I need spending money and I need to buy this and I need to buy that and I need to buy this and I have this bill to pay. And I'm like, does your husband work? And they said, yeah, but I pay these bills and he pays those bills and he has his money and I have my money. And I said, you're withholding part of yourself. You haven't given your whole self to your husband. If you don't trust him with your money, why do you trust him with yourself? Right? If you want to have a successful marriage, you have to, two need to become, in other words, two bank accounts need to become one. I mean, I'm sure you listen to some of these financial counselors and deal with money correctly until that's one of his main points. You're never going to have a happy marriage and deal with money correctly until you learn to become one financially too. So if the two are to become one, is that 100% or just part of you and then the rest of you don't become one? It's 100%. Has to be 100%. So it's intended to be a man and a woman. I would have never thought I'd have to put this line in here. But, I mean, you could share this video with whoever because it's just biblical principles. To complement each other, you must have something that you do not possess. Two men don't make a whole. Two women don't make a whole. A man and a woman make a whole. Now, I didn't make it up. The Creator who designed us made it up. I think He knows better. And it's just like when I don't use my tool correctly, if I go back to the owner's manual, it will tell me how. I think it's time we go back to the manual to tell us how, don't you? Because this mixture is the perversion that's affecting so many people. They don't even want to get married. Now they'll try anything. So what was the purpose of them coming together? Not only for their development, but what else? To populate the world and create a moral society. Remember, subdue the earth. What's going to do the most, what's going to help us to subdue the earth or create more morality in society? You know, it's Christian families. Christian families. Same-sex can the same-sex marriages repopulate the earth? Not with outside help. And no one else is supposed to get in that sacred circle. It's the best environment to raise balanced children. Wouldn't you think so? A man and a woman are going to help raise a more balanced child than two men or two women. It's just naturally the way it's supposed to be. I know, controversial. Would you ever believe that there's this man, you probably heard, he gives a nice speech on Christian family and morality to a bunch of Christians graduating from a college, but when the outside media gets a hold of it, they vivify him and they destroy this man because he's making a college commencement speech to a bunch of Christians about marriage and family and things, and he's a horrible person. This is speech. This is going to be called hate speech very soon. That we talk about marriage between a man and a woman, it means we hate people. Where is the hatred in that? It's actually what love is meant to be. And if the world was going to be subdued with morality, that's what it was going to take. That's why God instituted it. So the will of God then is one wife and one husband also, isn't it? Who was the first polygamist? Do you know who the first polygamist was in the Bible? Lamech. Yep, Lamech. And we see it right here. It's just down from not long down the line, and it says here in Genesis 4:19, and Lamech took unto him wives. The name of the one was Ada, and the name of the other was Zillah. So this was Methuselah's son. And notice what it says here in Spiritual Gifts, Volume 3. It says, in the beginning, God gave to Adam one wife, thus showing his order. He never designed that man should have a plurality of wives. Lamech was the first who departed in this respect from God's wise arrangement. He had two wives, which created discord in his family. The envy and jealousy of both made Lamech unhappy. When men began to multiply upon the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto men, they took them wives of all which they chose. This was one of the great sins of the inhabitants of the old world, which brought the wrath of God upon them. This custom was practiced after the flood, and became so common that even righteous men fell into the practice, and had a plurality of wives, yet it was no less sin because they became corrupted and departed in this thing from God's order. What was one of the reasons that led to the destruction of the old world? A plurality of wives. In Matthew 19 it says that a man shall leave his father and mother, and notice verse 6, Wherefore there are no more twain, but one flesh. What therefore God hath joined together, let not man put asunder. So who dissolves a marriage? God. Who brought them together? Who's the only one who can take them apart? It says here that man cannot do it. That's what the verse is saying. What God put together, man cannot put asunder. You may divorce, you may separate, but it's because the marriage dissolved. You need the approval of God. It's funny, we go to the approval of the earthly judge and get his signature on the paper to approve it, but we don't go to the spiritual heavenly judge who brought us together and get his approval for the dissolution, which is required, isn't it? So why divorce? Why did God allow divorce? We have a writing in Matthew 19, 7 and 8. It says, they say unto him, why did Moses then command to give a writing of divorcement and put her away? Notice his answer. He said unto them, Moses, because of the hardness of your hearts, suffered you to put away your wives, but from the beginning it was not so. God hates divorce. It's written right here in Malachi chapter 2. He talks about the wife of the covenant that you made, and then you're going to deal treacherously with her, and you're going to separate from her. And it says here, let's read them. Malachi 2, 12 through 16. The Lord will cut off the man that doeth this, the master and the scholar, out of the tabernacles of Jacob, and him that offereth an offering unto the Lord of hosts. And this have ye done again, covering the altar of the Lord with tears, with weeping, and with crying out, insomuch that he regardeth not the offering any more, or receiveth it with good will at your hand. Yet you say, wherefore? Or how did we do that? And he says, because the Lord hath been witness between thee and the wife of thy youth, against whom thou hast dealt treacherously, yet is she thy companion and the wife of thy covenant. And did not he make one? Yet had he the residue of the Spirit, and wherefore one? That he might seek a godly seed. Therefore take heed to your spirit, and let none deal treacherously with the wife of his youth. For the Lord, the God of Israel, saith that he hateth putting away. For one covereth violence with his garment, saith the Lord of hosts. Therefore take heed to your spirit, that ye deal not treacherously. So he's talking about, this is a spiritual analogy, but it's exemplifying the principle. When you have the wife of your covenant, of your youth, you don't deal treacherously with her. God hates it when you put her away. You pledged allegiance and you pledged faithfulness to her. So what happens when we make vows? Are we supposed to keep them? So they asked God, why did Moses then allow us to write a writing of divorcement? And what did he say? He said, right, first of all, what is divorcement? You know, it comes from the Greek word. Do you recognize that word? Apostastation. What other word do we get out of that? Apostasy. It's properly something separative, actually divorce. So divorce is apostasy from the covenant. Is apostasy ever good? It's only used 3 times, and it's in reference to divorce every time, and it refers back to the beginning. And what about the hardness of your hearts? So you asked Moses to have permission to apostatize. If somebody came up to the church and said, I want permission to apostatize from the church, what would we say? You'd say, this person has a spiritual problem. Wouldn't you? That's a spiritual problem. So why did they want a writing of apostasy from marriage? Jesus was clear with them. He said, because of the hardness of your hearts. But he said it in their language, which meant what? You are destitute of spiritual perception. Because you're destitute of spiritual perception, you want to apostatize from the covenant. Should divorce hates for you doing this thing. You see? So what does divorce actually result in anyway? So we get divorced, what happens? Well, divorce is apostasy from the covenant as a result of a lack of spiritual perception. Yes? And Jesus came to our world to rectify mistakes and to restore the moral image of God and man. Wrong sentiments in regard to marriage have found a place in the minds of the teachers of Israel. They were making of none effect the sacred institution of marriage. Man was becoming so hard-hearted that he would, for the most trivial excuse, separate from his wife, or if he chose, he would separate her from the children and send her away. Christ came to do what? Correct these evils, and his first miracle was wrought on the occasion of the marriage. Thus he announced to the world that marriage, when kept pure and undefiled, is a sacred institution. So Jesus came to rectify these kind of mistakes. Divorce, for instance. What should we be here doing? Trying to rectify these mistakes, right? By teaching and by example of what a marriage should be. So divorce does not equal a dissolved marriage. Matthew 19:6 says that what God has put together, let not man put asunder. And what does Romans say? A woman is bound to her husband as long as he liveth. So when does God release you from a marriage contract? What is his sign that you've been released? One of the spouses dies. Can you have any other clearer sign? Is there any other more official document than that? So you go to the courthouse and you get a divorce, and you can separate from that person. But in God's eyes, what are you? You're still married. He hasn't signed any paper yet. You'll know it when he signs the paper, won't you? Yeah, I'll move a little bit fast. So marriage then is a 3-way covenant. That's what we always have to remember. What are typical wedding vows? What do they typically say? I, so-and-so, take so-and-so to be my wedded wife or husband, to have or to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poor, for sickness and in health, to love and cherish till death do us part, but now I'm tired of you and I want to leave. How does that work? How does God view that? The three-way covenant. You may decide to part ways, but God decides when the marriage vow is released. Yes? Like every one of God's good gifts entrusted to keeping humanity, marriage has been perverted by sin. But it is the purpose of the gospel to restore its purity and beauty. That's our job, isn't it? We like to preach Sabbath and we like to preach health reform. What else should we be preaching? Proper marriage. The proper marriage relation. It was the intent of God to subdue the world with it. How far off the mark are we there now? What is the only cause for which a man may put away his wife? But even putting her away, does that make the marriage dissolved? No. Okay, so I have to speed up here. So God definitely is being left out today, isn't he? Are any of these principles that we talked about regularly used among the world in their preparations for marriage? Very few, if any. And why are the marriages then, why are we surprised then that the marriages don't work out? If you don't follow the blueprint, the building won't look the same, will it? In Second Selected Message, it says, the marriage institution was designed of heaven to be a blessing to man, but in a general sense it has been abused in such a manner as to make it a dreadful curse. That was back in her day. There wasn't, same-sex marriage even thought of then, much less legalized at that time. So how perverted has it become since then? Most men and women have acted in entering the marriage relation as though the only question for them to settle was whether they loved each other, but they should realize that a responsibility rests upon them in their marriage relation farther than this. They should consider whether their offspring will possess physical health and mental and moral strength. But few have moved with high motives and with elevated considerations that society had claims upon them which they could not lightly throw off, that the weight of their family's influence would tell in the upward or downward scale. Do you understand what this statement is saying? That the construction of your family will determine how well you influence society. And what is the state of, why is it so important today? Why are they ripping marriage down so much? Why is it so important that marriage be totally perverted before it can even be recognized as what it was? Because the enemy knows that this is how you change society. The enemy knows that. In fact, society is composed of families, and heads of families are responsible for the molding of society. Do you know how many people consider what will be the health of our children? Do you know there are other statements, I don't have it here, where she says, if you know that you have some long disease process that runs in your family, you should never have children. Why would you subject them to that? Right? Why would you subject society to those things? We have to think about, there's a higher moral purpose here than just our happiness and living in a home with another person. All of society is dependent on how we move in these things. We are making the next generations. And the families that they see and come out of will mold what happens next. And this is why the demise of society is happening so rapidly right now. Look around. Things are happening so fast, I don't know if they can be retrieved. God is being left out. And it says here that we're living in the last days when the mania upon the subject of marriage constitutes one of the signs of the near coming of Christ. Do you believe that? What I see happening, he has to come soon. There'll be no hope for society at all. God is not consulted in these matters. Religion, duty, and principle are sacrificed to carry out the promptings of the unconsecrated heart. There should be no great display and rejoicing over the union of the parties. There is not one marriage in 100 that results happily, that bears the sanction of God and places the parties in a position better to glorify Him. The evil consequences of poor marriages are numberless. They are contracted from impulse. A candid review of the matter is scarcely thought of, and consultation with those of experience is considered old-fashioned. But do you see what it says here? That there should not be rejoicing over these unions. You know, you really need to ask yourself when you see a union coming together, is this of God? If it's not of God, there should not be rejoicing, because it's going to cause more damage to society. And there's enough damage already, don't you think? There's enough damage already. This is finally our final statement. Now, as in Christ's day, the condition of society presents a sad comment upon heaven's ideal of this sacred relation. Can you imagine what she would think if she saw it today? Yet even for those who have found bitterness and disappointment, where they had hoped for companionship and joy, the gospel of Christ offers a solace. The patience and gentleness which His Spirit can impart will sweeten the bitter lot. The heart in which Christ dwells will be so filled, so satisfied with His love that it will not be consumed with longing to attract sympathy and attention to itself. And through the surrender of the soul to God, His wisdom can accomplish what human wisdom fails to do. Through the revelation of His grace, hearts that were once indifferent or estranged may be united in bonds that are firmer and more enduring than those of earth. The golden bonds of a love that will bear the test of trial. You know, without God, this is impossible. He has to be invited back into the marriage, doesn't he? And some have marriages who've been married. Sometimes we go off and it's just the two of us. Sometimes we go off and leave him behind, don't we? And we got to remember, we have to remember that this is a three-way covenant. And when we want it to work, we have to follow His principles and His plans, but we also have to invite Him back into this. So it could be what it was intended to be. The development of man, the subduing of the earth. I mean, there was such high and holy hopes for this institution. But what has happened to it? But as reformers, what are we called to do? Restore it. May God give us the strength and the help and the wisdom to be examples in this world, because it is declining rapidly. Amen.